DDoS attacks used to be seen as just annoyance, but today they are bigger, more targeted, and hitting critical industries like finance harder than ever before. Welcome to CISO Insights, our regular series with Steve Winterfeld, Advisory CISO at Akamai. In today's episode, we are looking at a new joint report from Akamai and FSISAC that shows just how much DDoS threats have changed, who is behind these attacks, who is driving them, and how defenders can better prepare. Steve is here to walk us through what's new and what security teams should be thinking about right now. Steve, great to have you back. Let's start with the report itself. Talk about this collaboration between Akamai and FSISAC.
So FSISAC is the Financial Services Information Sharing and Analysis Center. If you're familiar, there are, 15 to 25 ISACs. There's one for financial services. There's one for healthcare. There's one for retail and hospitality, aviation, on and on and on. And so these are groups where the members, and FSISAC has over 5,000 members. They're one of the ISACs that are global. And it's where all the banks and trading houses and stuff can join together and collaborate for security. And so again, when I was CISO at Nordstrom Bank, it was a great place to go in and see what the analysts were doing. They could talk without an NDA and I could see raw intelligence. So it's an amazing organization. And so we are one of the critical providers with them, the founder of that critical provider program. And so because Akamai protects over 400 banks across the world, we see so much DDoS traffic. And then, beyond banks, we just see so much global DDoS traffic. Akamai started off doing CDNs. We now do over $1 billion in cybersecurity. We're also doing cloud infrastructure. But all that data we have, we wanted to share it with the FSISAC community. So we started doing these joint annual reports. And it's all around DDoS. And so when I say DDoS, distributed denial of service attacks, that's applications, layer 7. So if you have APIs or a large language model or web pages, that's someone's coming in and attacking and denying access. It's your infrastructure. When you try to log into work, that's layer 3, 4 traffic. And we see a ton of denial of service against that. So people their systems just don't work. And finally, DNS, the domain name service, basically the phone book or GPS of the internet. And so if somebody attacks that and people can't find you because they can't resolve for you. And we have, attacks can be either size based on volume or crippling your infrastructure by, consuming your CPUs. And as we look at the attack trends, we're going to talk about how quickly, it goes from 0 to a new record-setting attack. That used to take hours. Now it takes minutes. The complexity, is it one type of attack or 7 different types of attack? Trying to overwhelm your defenses with all the different techniques, or is it just scope, that volume? So that's kind of what the report talks about.
Thank you for sharing more about this collaboration. What did Akamai and FSISAC learn this year, and why are DDoS attacks getting so much attention again?
Yeah, in a couple of years ago, we were talking about the rise in multi-vector attacks. The complexity was increasing. And now we've seen that pendulum swing back this year, and we're talking about it's more volumetric. So instead of testing for can you handle multiple types of attacks at the same time, now we're saying, can you handle this new peak of volume? And one of the things that I encourage people to do when they go look at these reports is if you go out to Akamai blog or if you go to any of these providers, we'll talk about the new record set. And then you can look at your infrastructure and say, if I work with an ISP, if I work with somebody like Akamai, what volume can can they protect? And am I going to be protected from having any customer impact? Because I want to make sure my customers have access. We continue to see finance, or the financial sector is the most attacked sector. As we look at the type of attacks, we see an increase in that application layer. Quite honestly, the cyber criminals are going to attack where we have the most revenue. And the revenue is on that web, on the APIs. That's where we interact with our customers. We're continuing to see an increase in the use of APIs, apps and all of these kind of things. And so as people go for this machine-to-machine contact, the enemies just follows us there, and the threat and the cyber criminals are attacking that. So while we saw an increase of about 19% on web pages, we've seen an increase in attack volume on APIs of 58%. And then finally, that motivation. We continue to see, and this has been a past 3 to 5 years, more and more hacktivist. So it's the motivation has changed from cybercrime to a hybrid of geopolitics. And most of this is in Europe and the Middle East, but we continue to see people attacking financial institutions for political reasons.
You touched on some great points, but I want to go a bit deeper. What were some of the big takeaways or shifts that jumped out to you in this year's findings?
So I talked about volumetric early on, but we continue to see, increases in multi-vector attacks. And part of this is it's becoming more sophisticated. If you've heard me talk very often, I'd love to talk about the MITRE attack framework. And that's the methodology where you would do reconnaissance, determine a vulnerability, come up with an exploit to attack the vulnerability, take actions inside the network once you got in there, and maintain access long term. And so we see DDoS attacks, rather than just slamming into people, now saying, okay, we can't, use a bot, and a bot is just a number of machines that have been taken over. So if you have 1 million bots, that gives you 1 million bots to attack one bank. That's a lot of volume. And the bots could be a DVR or my mom's computer or anything. It's just that all network computers. So if you have these bots out there that are international, and you're attacking a U.S. company that says, well, I don't have many customers internationally, so I'm going to block all international traffic. Well, then you have to shift to have all your bots come out of the United States. That reconnaissance is becoming, they probe, they're adaptive, and it's more an ongoing fight than just a slam into you fight. We continue to see that effort in trying to bypass systems. So, bypassing automated DDoS defenses, and typically on-prem networks where, you've got a proxy or a firewall or a load balancer, and you specifically focus on bypassing those capabilities. Talk a little bit about the regional aspects. EMEA, again, mostly based on geopolitics. Still have a lot of criminal activity, but that I think is the driving factor. In APAC, or the financial was the most attacked, getting about 38% of all volumetric attacks. North America finance was number 2 behind gaming. And there's a lot more detail in the report itself if you want to go out and read that. But those are the highlight notes.
I would love to see some examples or patterns that stood out, especially around what is motivating attackers today.
I think what's motivating the attackers is, it depends on who they are. Let me kind of jump into some examples of the threat actors. So Black Manta is pro-Palestine. And so, again, very politically active. And these are probably, the 5 or 6 most active threat actors. And so, and they have infra shutdown, a DDoS for hire service. So while they are doing a crime for hire service, they are also politically motivated. So it's that hybrid. You have No Name, which is pro-Russia. They have the DDoS tool, DDoS IA tool. And, again, they on Monday are working on cybercrime, and Tuesday are doing an attack against an institution that came out pro-Ukraine. And so this is an interesting one because, if your CEO does come out and make a political statement, that's where they may come and do a DDoS against you because you've come up on their radar. RipperSec is another pro-Palestinian, this one based out of Malaysia, and it's just very active. And I think that's why it makes a list, because it is so active and it has a number of members across, that region. GorillaBot is a platform. Again, it's provided by cryptocurrency based subscription. And this is where you see, the motivation is all based on what they're after. So if it's somebody who wants to attack a competitor, they can rent something out to attack a competitor. They want to attack a bank. If they want to attack somebody for cybercrime, that basically the motivations are varied there. And then finally, unattributed bot. And this one's based on methods. We know it's one botnet. We don't have a lot of intelligence around what its organization is based on or what its members are primarily motivated by. So that one is appropriately named.
The report also introduces a DDoS maturity model. What is that, and how can security teams use it to see where they stand when it comes to protecting and securing their own infrastructure?
So one of the things we're often asked, so if I go talk to the board, they want to know, how am I doing compared to my peers? How is this industry compared to other industries? Because they're trying to understand the risk. And I, as a board member, I want to make sure I'm doing the right thing by my stockholders. I'm investing enough in security, but I'm also not over investing in security. Because, I always tell my junior analysts, you can invest $100 in security or $1 billion. Neither number will guarantee that nobody gets in. It's just not practical. So you got to figure out what between 100 and a billion, what the right number for your org is. And so as somebody in the board, they want to say, well, how mature is our capability? So FSISAC and Akamai sat down and said, let's build a little framework so they can go talk to leadership and so they can actually manage their program with some goals. And so the levels are initial, reactive, proactive, manage, and adaptive. And so, initial is you have the bare bones basic things you would need. Probably not where most leadership would say, okay, that's an appropriate level. Next, you have reactive, where if something happens, you could probably get through it, but there's going to be some impact. It's not going to be clean. Proactive, again, you're probably, depending on your size, your expectations, where someone would want to see you. Proactive, maybe for a credit union, but not a top tier bank. Managed, and then adaptive. And these are all, we kind of lay out in the report, what kind of things would be done at each level, what kind of expectations. And so when you go and you talk to the board and you say, listen, right now, the amount we've invested for DDoS protection is initial. And we think most people, if we went into a class action lawsuit, a reasonable person would expect us to be at proactive. That's a great framework to enable a discussion.
If someone is reading this report and wondering what to do next, and this is my favorite part in conversation with you, what would you recommend as a starting point to them?
Yeah, any threat intelligence that isn't actionable, I really have no use for. So that's a great question. So bottom line is, I want to understand the attacker's behavior at the destination level and how it enables, my proactive and tailored countermeasures. So going back, I want to understand where I'm in the framework, how I can react. And then it reminds me some of the basics. So as I come back to this, and FSISAC has a great cyber fundamentals page. Akamai has some great blogs on how to work with your DDoS provider to optimize your capabilities. And so the first is, make sure your governance and continuous assessment for your vendors is doing well, because most people use a third-party vendor. Next is your tech options. If you're doing it yourself, are you doing geo IP filtering, dynamic traffic shaping, whitelisting, and there are a number of technical recommendations in the report. If you belong to a group, an ISAC or a threat intelligence sharing group, make sure you're actively working with them. Make sure you understand the trends. And what I feel is most important is what's working for other companies. What best practices are they doing? What lessons learned did they go through having survived one of these major attacks, and leverage all that. And then, don't forget the basics. Validate your playbooks or your processes, have exercises, do health checks with your vendors, make sure you know where you are, review your capabilities annually. What is the new trend? Now it's volume. What's the highest level volume attacks we've seen this year? Can I handle that volume? And then finally, remember to take credit. Go and brief your leadership. If you blocked a DDoS attack and it had no impact, sometimes we're like, okay, that wasn't an event. Well, I think it is. Go brief your leadership. We have had 5 DDoS attacks this year, and we successfully blocked all of those with no impacts to our customers. That way you're giving them feedback on their, basically a return on their investment understanding.
That's a very important point, because one of the big challenges for security is visibility, not just into threats, but into the work that they have done to stop them. How do you make sure that the rest of the organization actually understands the value of what you have prevented, especially when things are quiet and the leadership starts asking, why do you need this if we haven't been attacked in 2 years?
I think that is the constant balance. And that's why I said, it is dangerous not to take credit for what you've done. And so, if you go in and you say, we patched 70 machines this month. Well, that's not a risk statement. That's a task you completed. If you go in and you say, there were 2 new 0 days that came out this month, and we were able to patch within a week, so we had no impact for these new 0 days in the wild, that's a risk assessment that the board's going to say, okay, I see how you protected us. I'm happy I invested in you. And so I think it is understanding the board's role and your leadership's role, and even, your CTO, your CFO, your head of operations. All of those people are looking for you to minimize the friction and maximize the return on security investment. And so you need to speak on those terms of, this is what we were able to do. Now, every year we're going to be like, oh, we need to grow our budget by, 10% because of this or that, or I need this new capability. Right now, so many people have APIs coming out. Well, that's a new technology, and it requires a different level of security. The top 10, for web pages, the top 10 OWASP attack for web pages are not the same top 10 for APIs, which are not the top 10 for large language models. So as we have new technologies, we in security need new capabilities to help protect those. And that's part of that ongoing journey discussion of you're transforming, you got a new budget. We need a parallel budget to ensure you're continue to be protected. So that's kind of a bit of a rambling answer, but hopefully that was helpful.
This conversation makes it clear DDoS attacks are not just background noise anymore. They are part of a much bigger threat landscape, and they should be taken seriously.
Again, I always enjoy being on the show. I appreciate your insights and your questions. I encourage everybody to go grab the report. It's called From Nuance to Strategic Threat, DDoS Attacks Against the Financial Sector. If you go to FSISAC or Akamai and you look up the 2025 DDoS report, I'm sure you'll be able to find it. Thanks again. I appreciate everybody's time.
If you are working in cybersecurity and if you want to share your perspective, your story, how you are addressing these challenges, we would love to have you on the show. Just reach out to us. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe and hit that bell icon so that every time we upload a new video, you will be notified. And we'll see you in the next episode. Thanks for watching.